Welcome, everybody. Is workflow the in health AI? We're going to be talking about that for the next hour, and I'm going to be introducing our panel in about a minute. We're letting people in, so I'm just kind of setting the table a little bit with why we're doing this event, what inspired it, and there's some news yesterday, too, I want to mention, actually. Some of you may have already seen it. And this is a question that's been bounced around a lot this year. Is workflow paramount? Is workflow not enough? Is it necessary but not sufficient? And it's this question that keeps coming up. And the moat. What do we mean by the moat? The moat is, does it make you defensible from competition? As in, I think like a moat around a castle. Is this what's going to protect you from being beaten to the punch or usurped by a competitor? Does it give you a defensible position? That's what we mean by the moat. And just a bit of a backdrop. There's a lot of people talking on LinkedIn in the last 24 hours about what ChatGPT's new agentic system. A lot of people are saying, oh, this is going to put a lot of startups out of business. You've got to be more vertical. You have to have really good UX. You really got to be integrated, or you're going to be very vulnerable. But I'm not going to dive into that anymore. I'm going to introduce the panel. And first person, we have Conjure Dillon, who's going to be looking at it from a healthcare POV. She's a clinician by background. Now she is a digital transformation. She hears a lot of pitches. And so she's going to be giving you that POV, that advice. Jim Sabago is enterprise level healthcare IT, helping very big picture, the whole hospital. And he's going to be talking. I probably did a very bad job of introducing you, Jim. I'm sorry, but we're bringing him on in a minute. And Robert Goodman is he's a VC, an advisor with a data background. He gives a lot of advice and guidance, also as in terms of investing in startups in health AI. He's going to be giving us the business POV. And Gazent Mansour, who's built, I think it's 150 applications. He's going to be giving us insights and knowledge about building out from the ground up and what to build and also what not to build, knowing when not to build something. Now, I hope I did a good job of introducing everybody. I'm going to start with, I'm going to bring them on the screen. There you go. So you were conveniently small in the top while I butchered the introductions to you guys. Thank you all. And I'm going to give you a chance to say the thing I didn't when I introduced you in a moment. But I wonder if we could start with Zenfer. I have a question for you. Why is workflow important? Why is that more important than the model or the data? Sorry, why might workflow be more important than the model or the data? Could it be the
Okay, yeah. So yeah, thanks, Jose. So I'll just give a quick intro as well. So I run a software development company, healthcare software development, where we help companies do two things: improving operations through AI and technology, building AI agents, automation, helping them grow 10x through technology, and secondly, building HIPAA compliant software products. So this topic is very relevant to what we come across pretty much every other day. So why workflow is a mode, not the model? So the way we look at it, the models are getting commoditized. New models are coming every day. So you have different models on ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Grok. There's so many. So you cannot be married to a model. The differentiator is what you build, what processes what workflows you are building in your organization that's going to be a differentiator. If you are tied to a model, that will continue to evolve and you are running that race. But the real defensibility is not really the algorithm, it's how you operationalize it inside your workflow. And that's what others can't copy. You have a very specific operations in your hospital, practice, organization, wherever, whatever the stuff you're doing. Those are very specific and those are unique workflows that you can automate, and that would be your differentiator. I think that's the way we look at it. So everybody's chasing the model, but that's important as well, knowing what models are good for your specific, but focusing on how we can bring efficiency using these flows. So that's where I think where workflow is where AI meet reality.
I'll kind of follow up with you. And because you're seeing a lot of this from the other end, what are the biggest bottlenecks from workflow that maybe this could be a chance for you to, that can realistically solve?
And
maybe
a wish list, absolutely. Wouldn't that just be wonderful? I think the bottlenecks is understanding how the workflows truly interact with one another. A workflow is not a singular pathway. It is interacting and affecting a multitude of other networks and pathways and workflows. And it is a whole sequelae of impact one specific workflow can have. So when you improve efficiency in one, you have to look at the adjunct pathways. Now, you might be improving efficiency there as well, but you might actually be negatively harming or bypassing something. So that all sounds very theoretical. I'd love to get into some of the practical aspects of that in terms of clinical care and where we see a number of workflows, things like diagnostic pathways, and there's a lot of radiological implementation of AI, but actually there's histology, there's then the clinical case. So when you put that all together, when you look at that workflow all together, and that's what clinicians are doing and digesting, and if technology is able to do that as well, then you're looking at that bird's eye view. So not just one workflow in a isolated fashion. So it's actually really, I'm really interested in interoperability, data sharing, because that's what allows you to do that. It allows you to look at multiple workflows and how they're interacting with one another and ebbing and flowing. So I'd say that's probably the biggest bottleneck from my perspective.
I've never heard someone say sequelae outside. I've only read it in a book.
Does it show that I work in a hospital from time to time?
And Robert, from a business model standpoint, why is this so hard? And I know a lot of people, why is it harder to replicate than in other technical domains? And I know a lot of people say this. They'll just say it's hard. Why is it so hard?
From my perspective, Jose, I think workflow innovation lies at the intersection of technology and human behavior, right? And so I think part of the difficulty is you have to understand all the various stakeholders at play, and you have to understand how they operate in a sort of a high pressure healthcare system, right? What are their friction points? What are their incentives? And where are areas of opportunity to align? And so I think that's really the secret sauce. To Zentra's point, the LLMs really are becoming commodity. They're all going to continue to innovate, and it's just we're at an incredible pace right now. But I think I mentioned to you earlier, I have a good friend who started a company called OpenRouter.ai. He's received $40 million in funding already, and he's off to the races. But that part of the differentiation of his product is you can actually price and performance test LLMs against one another. So I think, again, back to the point of LLMs becoming commodity, the workflow becomes your IP and your moat, right? A deep understanding of that workflow, a deep understanding of how your stakeholders interact. And I'll leave one last thought. AI prompts can't be patented. I'm not a patent attorney, so take that advice as you may, but you can patent a method or a workflow. You cannot patent just a clinical prompt, for example, that goes into an LLM.
Yeah. Tim, I know you deal with a lot of agents, a lot of workflows. And is there something that you could Is there a trend in terms of that you're seeing that you can share with us in terms of how healthcare is using agents and workflows, or is it all over the place?
No. So from an introductory perspective, the way I approach and the benefit to the audience here is that you have a variety of different folks, people from Europe, US perspective, right? People that make apps, people that are on the venture side. And so what I tell our clients, what I do is basically I work with your IT solutions such that you can improve patient care. And when I look at workflows and what they're meant to be, if you go back a couple of years before the explosion of AI, workflows were a part of automation. Workflows were the thing that connected disparate systems. In the US, we have a problem in that we have multiple applications. Think of 2 hospitals on different EHRs. They don't want to basically stop their operations, so they basically share certain things. Or the way in which one large hospital has multiple applications that are not the same, different financial system, different HR system. These are all the operational aspects. They support the patient care. Patient comes in, they get some health care, they leave. Now I have to do all this stuff in terms of processing paperwork, updating records, all sorts of things. There are a variety of different APIs to solve the interoperability perspective, but workflows has been around for quite some time. And it's your ability to design, if you will, the workflow that is tailored to your organization. Just before this call, I talked to several organizations about this, right? Like, how are we going to bring AI in? How does AI work in this model where I have very specific workflows? And the answer really is cost savings and productivity. Some more about it, but I would be interested in getting feedback from the other panelists in those areas, because we are stressed out in the US when it comes to healthcare. And any chance we could do to be more productive, the AI agent will take the data that the workflow has gathered and basically parse it out and make it a little bit more easier to consume. When it comes to cost savings, replace all the manual operations. This is what I tell clients. Just take them out, right? If you have a call center, if you're doing something repetitive, the AI agent can take care of it. And I don't care where the data is, because the workflow can run around and go and grab all this data, present it to the AI agent to do something. Thoughts, comments?
Did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, anybody.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Jim, in the sense that understanding the nuanced workflow. So one workflow can look very different between 2 organizations or 3 or every organization. There's a uniqueness to the same process between organizations and sometimes even within it. So different structures within that organization. So a deep understanding of what's nuanced there. Who are your stakeholders there? Are we looking at 1 or 2 clinicians working in a small practice who are reliant on their administrative personnel to action key pieces of data versus a much larger corporate organization where there's various other processes before? It's not so reliant between that PA clinician relationships. Just applying it to one scenario there, but the same thing can look so different. So having a really clear mapping of that actually protects how then that specific piece of tech is utilized. So I absolutely see it that way and would very much support that.
We got a lot of questions in the chat. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say I want to add to what Jim and Kanjali said. I agree with both of them, but I want to add something as we were talking on agent. Let's talk a little bit more also on AI agents, automation or agentic. So yeah, in a traditional automation, it follows a script, but in agentic, it's the intent. Your agentic AI, it doesn't just execute the task, it observes the reasoning, it improves over time. And that's the foundation of those adaptive workflows, because it's not about just following a certain sequence that we have been doing. Now, AI is also learning, improving, and giving you a feedback. And that's based on that you're improving your workflows. So that's the part that's going to make a big differentiator, because now your AI is, or your models, your workflows are not really just a traditional automation that have been there for years. Now this is more smarter, I would say, more agentic.
That's really interesting, Gazenfa, because what you're describing there is a bit of a dynamic workflow. So things are changing and evolving within the same ecosystem potentially. So there really needs to be a strong feedback loop around that to protect that, where these are dynamic pathways, essentially, when we're talking about agentic AI in healthcare.
Yeah.
And I'll add.
Yeah, some of the clients that I'm working with, to Gazenfa's point on the agentic side, what they're trying to negotiate is take a workflow, and it's not one agent that does it, it may be a host of other agents, right? Some that calculate things that, without providing a specific example, that's just a group of these things. When you look at the workflow, I want the workflow to gather up all this information. I'll give you a case in point. Patient comes in, she's coming in for a routine check. The hospital has records that go back several years, and really what I'm looking for is a summary of that data prior to me walking in the room and having a conversation with her. I have not seen her in 6 months. So how does that work? And think of that physician, the clinician, doesn't care where the technology can drag all this information in. He doesn't care about that. All he's concerned with is getting to that patient, giving her the latest on what we have. Let's go through the examination, gather the data, and then make an analysis. That's what they're looking for in a short window. So Gazenfa, you're right. The agentic agent can go out and gather up and make some decisions to make the life of the clinician a little bit easier. And at the same time, it's the workflow that's whipping around and pulling up all this stuff. So interoperability is really key in this case.
I wonder if
Makes sense? Does that make sense?
Jim, I think those are fantastic points. In fact, I just started a company through a spin out with an academic research institution to do some of what you just mentioned.
Oh, cool.
But it's literally automating patient intake. And we've integrated the outputs of what we're calling synopsis into the clinical workflow. So we designed a set of clinical prompts specifically within oncology to ingest the information, make it more readily available for the clinicians that are working the case, and then also meet the clinicians where they are in Epic. I think there's a lot of value in doing that. And then for the other startups that are listening, the other thing that we've observed is a lot of this is focused around efficiency from the onset, right? But how can we change the narrative and go from efficiency to revenue generation? Because investors want to see revenue generation, less efficiency, more revenue. So
if you take that scenario and think of it as a factory, I hate to say it that way, right? I've got a hospital and I got people coming in, people going out. The more I can process, right? That's the revenue generation side. And it requires not the physician coming in and just seeing you for 10 minutes and out the door. It's more meaningful, right? All we're doing with the data, and prior to the discussion, we were talking about UIs and things like that. You want something really simple, fast, easy to do. And that clinician can now see other patients. Clinician friends of mine that are working in hospitals in specific scenarios are seeing many more patients on a daily basis, and they can't expand that without hiring more people because they have to have access to that data. So that's, in my opinion, where the revenue can come from. If I can put, and I hate to say it this way, put more patients through the hospital process, then fine. And it is complicated. Constantly, I can't talk about Europe. I can talk about the US, but we have a complicated system from the moment you start at the reception desk to the moment you get discharged. It's wicked difficult in some hospitals.
No, and truly, Jim, I support what you're saying. We have a public healthcare structure here as well. So the patients keep coming, the systems are overburdened, there is not enough resource. So this is where technology is so exciting for the NHS and other public healthcare structures within Europe, because we're looking at operational challenges where volume is a huge issue, and we're not grabbing the opportunity that we have with the data that we're gathering, be that in improving efficiency, but also research. So when you collate all that information, you can truly make some leaps and bounds in medical research as well. No, I support that vision, though I understand its challenges when we're talking about a privatized healthcare ecosystem.
Can I ask Robert a question? And this comes up a lot, and I think you're the right person to ask. how do you turn a workflow into revenue? Because I think a lot of people, and I know you've spoken to this, but I'll talk to startup founders where we've got a great workflow. And then we've got this bucket we hold out and we wait for money to fall into it. And they haven't figured that part out yet until they go to market and they get this nasty surprise. What advice do you have? Because I know there's a lot of these people in the audience who are similar about. And Brian, I'll get to your question. I know you're coming at it from a different direction. We're going to come back to that. We've got a lot of questions in the chat. I'm going to try and work them in. But if you could do that, Robert, speak to that.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I talked a little bit about stakeholders a moment ago. I think part of it is understanding your stakeholders and who owns the P&L. Step one. I think step two is really clarifying the ROI story to go from we made this process faster to we saved 2.25 hours per patient with this task or this automation or this AI, right? And then figuring out how that then translates even further down the value chain to, for example, I was talking about clinical efficiency a moment ago and how it translates into potential revenue. What I mean by that is if a physician is saving 2.5 hours per patient with an automation, look, that's extra capacity that then could be used for that physician to be seeing other patients or doing other value-added activity that bring in revenue. And there is some debate around that. If physicians did have extra capacity, does it mean that they would be seeing more patients? Maybe not. I guess it depends on the administration and the willingness of the physician. Does it improve quality care? Again, not sure. I think from an efficiency perspective, absolutely. It definitely provides less burden on the staff that has to do a lot of these manual tasks from a burnout perspective. I can guarantee you no clinician enjoys going through 100 pages of patient intake history before seeing a patient preparing for that examination. So I think there's still, a lot of this is still up for debate, but I think back to your question around revenue, it's you have to have a clear ROI story. You have to own who owns that P&L, and then being able to provide that linkage between the value creation that is generated and the outcomes on the other end.
Yeah, I want to, Robert, just add to that by saying that what a lot of healthcare leaders are looking at here in the US is that improvement in productivity and basically cost savings. Because if you think about a hospital, they're not meant to make money, right? They basically have to make sure that their revenue is basically zero or maybe a percentage to above that. That's what they're aiming for. So anything I can do to improve that process, anything I can do to lower that cost, right? Think of the price of medicines. I can't change that. However, I could be very judicious about how I basically order some of these things. So technology, to Kanjali's point earlier, is going to be the key that's here. I totally agree with you. You need the model to match up with that because the difficulty in implementing, and Gehensifer, I want to get your opinion on this, implementing these AI agents is I can do 100 of them. But if it's not adding value, right, you have to almost kind of put a circle around one of them and say, okay, did this save me money? Did this improve my productivity? And then go from there. I don't know. Gehensifer, you make some of these tools. So how do you see that happening?
Yeah, I think this is one of those. So AI is not gonna improve, just bring efficiency. It's gonna output what you have in your business processes. And computer science, we study GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't have a clean data, if you have a messy workflows, AI is not going to come and do the magic. So the first part is getting your data cleaned, have those mapped workflows defined, map those workflows, and obviously have the governance around that, like how all of this will work. And then you can work on the automation. But just putting automation, and this is one of the common challenges we see, like people do come and say they want to create an agent for something or want to bring in AI in their business, but many times it's not ready. So you have to work on those basics before you can automate any of those. Because once you have that right data, then all these agents will do the magic for you.
And we got a lot of, I can't keep up with all the questions in the chat. And
there's one in the Q&A too.
Oh, wow. I'll put that in the chat. How can a clinician, surgical technology US, So surgical technologist, you ask, with ideas of application to streamline their practice using AI to position themselves to get traction and attention from their AI movement in healthcare to
that's a
take their
Robert
ideas
question.
and iteration to the next level.
Give it to
What are
Robert.
the available resources
I can,
out there for collaboration, mentoring, guidance for potentially early stage startup funding? There's something there for maybe Rob, because then for Rob, do you want to both take a stab at that question? I put it in the chat as well.
I can take the first part of it, and then maybe Rob can take the second one. So the first part is about how the clinician can, I think, let me read that again. How the clinician with ideas of application to streamline their practice. Yeah, so this is where I think earlier Jim was talking about hospitals, a lot of people. So those are complex, complicated systems. And most healthcare businesses do try to scale with people. And that's a normal, I would say, expectation. But I think that's where your processes, where you automate those workflow, you grow with the technology, not really with the flow. So automation is not going to replace your people, it's going to amplify, but at the same time, the growth with people is okay, but it's a nightmare as well. So you want to automate those processes, looking at identifying those workflows which can bring efficiency.
Yeah, I think to add to that, Jose, from a resources perspective, part of it depends on what state you live in, potentially what country for those that are outside of the United States. Stateside, and I'm speaking from personal experience in the state of South Carolina. Conjurley and I were just joking earlier. I'm a pandemic transplant from Washington, D.C. We moved down to the Hilton Head Island area during the pandemic. But anyway, long story short, there are economic development resources that are available for a lot of startups, particularly healthcare startups. And so there are grants that are given to help incubate startups. And if you're a medical doctor or within a health system, there are even more opportunities to make an impact. So we've seen a lot of startups incubate within sort of academic research institutions. And then outside of that, if you're just an early stage company looking for support, there's some really great sort of venture capital groups that can provide resources to you. We work with a couple internationally that have done tremendously interesting things. Mars Discovery District, they represent all of Canada, but happen to be based out of Toronto. There's also another company in Norway called Innovate Norway. So we see a lot of innovation coming through them. But there are a whole host of different organizations that provide early stage support, and then venture capital groups like mine at Saltgrass Capital that invest. We actually manage a $150 million B2B health AI fund. And we're always looking to connect early stage founders to those groups to get the support that they need. And sometimes the support that they need isn't dilutive funding. It's non-dilutive resources like grants and things to help them scale and grow a little bit further. So anyway, if anybody wants to chat, I'd be happy to take that conversation offline as well.
I've got a couple
Wow.
more questions to ask you
Thanks.
guys. But we've got so many in the chat. Do you mind if we tackle the ones in the chat?
Sure.
Is that all right?
Go for it.
Then I'm gonna try and work in my question. Because we got a lot of questions in the chat. By the way, just to the audience, some of you guys know this, some of you don't. But the webinar ends in 28 minutes. When the webinar ends, and give our final word, we're going to wrap up the event. We say goodbye to YouTube. We stay on. You don't have to go anywhere else. There's an after party, and you're welcome to come on. And any questions we've missed, including some of my own, we'll work them in if we can during the after party. But this is your opportunity to speak. You can come on camera or microphone and talk to the panel. And let's see, this one. Here's a question from Brian. Brian, I told you I'd get to your question about how do we ensure. So I'll read it out. What he says: agree that many workflows can be automated through agentic AI and data streamlined. How do we ensure that these workflows are not just optimized for healthcare providers, but actually improve the patient experience and ultimately quality of care? Optimal for healthcare provider is not always, or even usually, that's a bit barbed, equally optimal for the patient. Does everyone want to tackle that? Ekanjali.
I'll go after.
I'm going to
You
beg
too, Jim.
I'm going to
You
beg to differ. I can see where you're coming from, Brian. I appreciate that. But I think happy doctor, happy patient, happy doctor. Ultimately, if I can reduce the cognitive burden on that provider, they're going to have a more meaningful conversation with you and not be typing away on the computer or whatever it is they might be worried about because of X number of clicks. I do see what you're saying. We do need to have a patient-centric approach to some of our innovations. We focus very much on who the adopters are going to ultimately be, particularly in sort of secondary care, and they're the ones buying the solutions, right, that are then patient-facing or capturing patient data. So I can see that we can get quite siloed or quite blinkered about thinking about their needs, but that does impact patient care positively, certainly in my experience, because it gives me more time to do doctoring, which I'm again going to be contrarian and say cannot be done by technology wholly. It requires interaction with the person in front of you. I take your point, but I think that the two are interlinked.
Yeah, I'll start by saying I want to give you 3 points, right? First point is this. When you talk about workflows and the automation through agentic AI, take every manual process you have and start there, okay? So think about that for a moment. Number 2, an example of that in the US, this is a difficult process at times, is patient discharge. We were talking with Robert earlier about revenue, right? So the time it takes from the patient who has gotten Dr. Jose to say, you're ready to go home, till the time they leave the room, then think of all the processes and the groups that have to come in and clean the room, reset it, and get it ready for the next patient, is not making money. It's a gap between two patients. Agentic AI and workflows can basically shrink that down. If you go to any surgery in a hospital, they usually have these big boards, and in it, they have the doctors and they have their operations and gaps in between them. Why is that? Because they're cleaning the room. If I can shorten that, we go back to Robert's question, I can make more money because I have now another patient ready to go in for their surgery. That's point number 2. Point number 3, a lot of times the whole idea around deciding which one of these agentic AI is going to impact patient care has a lot to do with the surroundings around the patient. What is their experience? One hospital I work with basically said, we have been able to reduce the time it takes a patient to register from a couple of hours to a few minutes. That means I have a positive view when I start my process through the hospital. And that's what you want technology to help you with. Does it directly impact patient care? I'm not sure what they're in for. However, that initial experience is good. So find those places where you can actually remove some of these manual processes, replace it with automation, even as simple as a call center. I don't know how they do it in Europe, but in the US, they have a lot of people that do nothing but take calls. Why can't I automate that and have it done quickly, if you will? And that's what hospitals are doing right now. They're testing out these agents in that space. Just a couple of examples.
I wonder if you can
And-
answer this question from the
Go ahead.
Dardo's point of view.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. Both Ekanjali and Jim already covered pretty much everything. I'm just going to add to what Ekanjali said. Even those flows are patient specific, it's the user experience is a common problem. Like even up till today, most applications are still being built just to solve a problem, but doesn't mean users will like it. How many times you have those applications where it's solving a problem, but those times are gone. We used to have a Craigslist, I remember, where it doesn't matter what it is, but people would use it. But now things have changed. So people do want a better experience. You want to have an application where for user, it's a really seamless experience. So patient-centric design is key. So knowing, and then filling that gap. So you have doctors, healthcare specialists, and then you have those developers. And then there's this gap. These people are building the application on the other side, they're using it. How do you fill that gap? That you understand that space and build something that those people understand. So filling that gap is very critical, because otherwise you're going to just build another application that's just built by engineers, which is a great, powerful application, rock solid, but nobody uses it.
Yeah, Zephyr, just to add to that really quickly, I have
good point.
a friend of mine that just started a company called Carious Health. And she's actually looking at it from a patient experience perspective, using AI to, you basically plug in your health plan information and you can source physicians in your geography that are available
Wow.
for the clinical specialty that you're seeking. And a step further is not only can you select the physician, but you can actually select the procedure that you need. And then you can cost compare one physician to the other, but you can also look at quality and safety scores of the hospital and of the physician. So I think there are a lot of really interesting ways to Brian's point that we are looking at this from a patient perspective as well. But I think it's going to be a win-win, but it has to be done in an ethical way on both ends, right?
Good point. Agreed. Good point.
Question in the Q&A. We are developing a US/RCM solution in this space and doing customer discovery. What market pressures do you see, like CMS, if that or other parts, as driving pressure for providers to make buying decisions? Regulations around data transparency, audit trails, compliance, and interoperability. I'm putting it in the chat. I'm not too sure what does you stand for? RCM. I'm Googling it. All right.
I'm very happy to talk about governance in general. And when we talk about sort of safety versus innovation and that eternal struggle versus the red tape versus trying to think creatively when you're looking at issues and challenges. I think for me, it's about having that sort of sandbox experience as a team where it's still an experimental culture that you're able to build, but patient safety, it's not seen as red tape. It's seen as something that you're innovating alongside with. So that's there to protect you. It's there to protect the patients. It can be frustrating sometimes, particularly say here in Europe and the UK, we're trying to deregulate unnecessarily as well. But having that sort of experimental safe space, sandbox type thing, project space is the way I would look at it. But though I still don't understand some of the jargon in that question.
Utilization management and revenue cycle management. But maybe we can.
In simple terms, all they're talking about is how well are you using the hospital? Remember that example I gave you? The surgical room is now empty and you're cleaning it out. The patient room is empty and then you're cleaning it up to get ready for the next one. And revenue cycle management is looking at all those things to say, okay, am I making money? Am I losing money? Where are the spaces where I can shrink to be able to do some of these things? It's like supply chain in a different industry, but this is healthcare, so let's not bring that up.
All right. I want to actually go back to one of my questions. And for how do AI agents and agentic systems, do they change the way we think? Because I know Jim said we've had workflow automation for a long time. Do AI agents and agentic systems change the way we think about it? Automation.
Yeah. I think I pretty much covered this already in one of the follow-up to James' question. Like the AI agent that follow the normal process and agentic follow the intent, and then there's a feedback loop that is necessary. So as you're creating those agents, it's learning, it's looking at, it's understanding your process, and it behaves based off the feedback that you have. So those are more, I would say, smarter AI agents, and those are the ones people are building now.
We've got a healthcare ethics questions in the chat, Kanjali, and I saw you. This one, do you mind answering this one? Hello, this is from Oksana. I would like to understand how you balance the use of artificial intelligence with preserving privacy and confidentiality, preventing information disclosure, and following ethical standards. And I think this might be informed by the fact that a lot of people have been using prompt injection to extract data from these systems. And that's been in the news a lot lately.
Okay, I can tell you certainly for our ecosystems, we're GDPR compliant. That's a non-negotiable in terms of how we process our data, how we look at our data. Adhering to those regulations is a given. And I don't really know how else to answer the question there. I think working within the structures of the pillars that you have is really important. You're not going to get very far if you don't accept the landscape and if you're continually resisting against it. From an ethics point of view, being upfront with how that data is being used, how the organization is processing it, looking at it, translating it, and where that's coming in and coming out from is paramount and requires the patient's consent every step of the way.
And I would add to that there's two pieces to that. From a US perspective, if you have legacy systems, right, there are some standards, right? The HL7 stuff that has to be adhered to. If you have a more modern infrastructure, that's the FHIR application. And again, both of those are designed in such a way to be able to allow you to manage the data, if you will, in those two different environments. On top of that, most of the platforms are encrypted. So a bad actor can't just come into any kind of hospital system and then start to remove data, because then it's a security issue. So there is technology around those sorts of things that happen. Now plunk in an AI agent in the middle of that, right? And it's the workflow that gathers the information and gives it to the agent to make a decision, because the workflows can't do anything, right? The workflows can run through a process, but then present the data that's there. But remember, that whole environment that Kanjali describes is basically where these agents live. And this is going to have how they're going to manipulate that data. And it is manipulation because you've given it information to kind of make some decisions the way you want to have those decisions done. Make sense?
I want to add some more into that. This is one of the common questions that we get all the time because we work a lot with healthcare, HIPAA compliant applications. Data security is definitely one of the bigger questions. Like, how do I take my healthcare data? I don't trust LLMs. So by default, yes, anything you load into your AI is going to be used for training. But there are ways to prevent that. So we're working on, for example, multiple personal health applications where you're loading the personal data, it gives you predictions and all of that. But the very first thing you want to do is you want to work with LLM that signs BAA. So they are giving you in writing that any data that you put on the LLM using the API, they will make sure the data is encrypted on there. They have an audit log of who accesses, as well as that data will never be used for training the model. So that's number one. And secondly, you also want to have your own processes in place. So obviously, how you are sharing the data could be anonymization or different ways. But another important part is there's a concept called RAG, retrieval augmented generation. This is how you give AI context without giving away the control. So what you're doing is you're putting your data in chunks into your vector database. So you are using AI to query, but then your data is coming off of the RAG system. So you are not, so it basically it lets you combine your internal data with the powerful model while staying compliant. So that's how most of these secure applications working when you have internal sensitive data that you don't want LLMs to use. So the RAG is very common, I would say, it is industry standard now. So you have to make sure you follow those. It's not like you're loading them. And there's a context, there's a token cost as well. Like you can't just be loading all the data into AI because of the limited context. It won't be giving you a search off of everything. Yes, in our normal one, we are loading it, but those contexts are small. Once you have that huge data set with terabyte of data, so you have to have a different approach of that. And so those are HIPAA, not much familiar with GDPR, too much detail, because we mostly work in the US, but they're not a blocker to AI. They are just the design constraint, how we push us to build the data, to design our application safer. So as long as we are following those processes and making sure the data stay compliant. So BAA, RAG, and then following the HIPAA regulations when it comes to building, which is audit trail, data in transit, data encryption and transit and rest. authentication, authorization, who's accessing data, what time.
Zenford, those are all excellent points. I was just going to mention too, and maybe this is apparent for those on the line, but just to be repetitive, a lot of these instances of AI that are implemented within healthcare are also done in sort of private hosting or an isolated VPC, right? And so it's not the same as just going to open an AI and typing in an answer and getting a response. It's done in a very controlled, HIPAA compliant way. And so it's actually a good thing for any early stage startups that are on the line. If you're thinking about high trust and you're thinking about HIPAA, do it. It's going to be a requisite to break into the healthcare market. But I think to Zenford's point, there are all sorts of controls that are put in place as a part of HIPAA compliancy, audit logging and zero retention policies or minimal retention policies. And of course, the BAA that he's mentioning is just the agreement by which you can even access some of the patient data that you might feed into the AI. So anyway, just thought I'd mention that as some deeper context as well.
Thanks, Robert, for covering the private LLM that I missed from my. It gets expensive, by the way. So you're right. Like for startups, it may be when you can install Llama or any other, but it's going to be crazy expensive.
Yeah, and then all the FDA approvals, if you get into the clinical stuff too, don't wait on that stuff. It's really critical to get going sooner rather than later.
We got a question from Krishna. Biggest headaches. What are the top 2 to 3 most challenging workflows for hospitals to handle? What about these workflows are challenging for a hospital? How are they addressing the challenge today? Sounds like someone's doing product discovery. Kanjali.
It's very hard to have a specific scenario there. There are workflow challenges all over the place. I think emergency departments are usually the bottlenecks into the entire hospital, and then discharge processes. So particularly here in the UK, getting patients into the hospital and getting patients out to the hospital are generally 2 big workflow challenges. Getting those right. How do we make sure we admit the sickest patients first? We escalate them quickly. We actually protect them from deteriorating. You detect early signs of sepsis before the patient becomes physiologically distressed. These are things that we can really optimize with some of the data that we have now, because we're being able to capture it and get it in front of the right person, or possibly not a person at all, to do something about that. Those are definitely 2 areas that have always been really important here. I'm sure it's the same in that terrain as well. But it really depends on the hospital, the volume, the size, location. So we're talking about a large hospital in the middle of a city or a rural hospital, which is accepting patients from near and far. And actually geography is a challenge. So being able to remote patient monitor and have a view of your community remotely as a central organization is something that we can really look to. So it really depends on the context, but wonderful question.
Yeah, and I would add, I completely agree, Kanjali, and all that. I would add a challenge for a lot of hospitals is when a patient has to go for rehabilitation, right? They've been discharged, and now they have to get transferred to another location. You have to schedule the nurse, you have to basically have the paperwork in advance, you got to schedule the transportation, all sorts of things that are there. Think of it this way, if it's Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, and they need to go to a rehabilitation center, who is around to basically initiate all that paperwork and who will receive that patient? In certain parts of the US, this is always a challenge, okay? So hospitals have that, and it does occur, but those are workflow challenges that hospitals have to get over because it's Friday afternoon, they're off, they're changing shifts, they're doing all kinds of things. So just yet another example, but can be done. How they do it today is manual work, a lot of effort to get that done.
Done. We're going to go to final word soon. I wonder maybe we should actually start. Kanji, could you give us your final word? I'm not kicking anybody out, but we're clipping the event for YouTube. And the reason why we do that is the people who come by in the after party, we don't necessarily have your permission to publish what you're going to say. So we cut the event at the 60-minute mark for the YouTube replay. So when you speak in the after party, you don't have to worry about us using your voice and your image in our content without your permission. Obviously, if you give it to us, we can use it. Obviously, we're happy to use it. But I'm wondering if we're getting ready to say goodbye to YouTube, Akanjali, if you can give us a wrap up, final word before we go there.
Yeah, I think the title of this webinar is so interesting. I really had to sit and think, what does a moat mean to me? When I think about a workflow as a moat, what do I really understand from that? And that's an example of a great question. So really, moat in this scenario really is a competitive advantage. But workflows are changing in healthcare very quickly. And so there's always that risk that the workflow also becomes the blinker. So the very thing that protects you also becomes the thing that can potentially harm you if you don't understand how it might be changing, or certainly the whole ecosystem is changing. So I think that agility is paramount, and really looking at how can I use or how can I deploy the same piece of technology, the same agent in different scenarios when we're really talking about the same functionality, but different institutions, different organizations, different geographies, and how that impacts the way that it's implemented.
Robert.
So well said, Akanjali. She's always a tough act to follow. She's so well spoken. But no, I agree with everything Akanjali said. I think we're all figuring this out together, and everyone is trying to figure out how they can make AI defensible from an investment perspective. I think as we move forward, I think workflow could be the moat. I mentioned earlier, you can't patent a prompt, but you can patent a method. And there's something to that, being able to understand a business to the extent that you understand the stakeholders involved, the intricacies of their business process, their friction points, their incentives. So I think there's something special here that we should really keep an eye on.
Jim, final word.
Okay, so 3 things. I think we talked a little bit about the fact that workflows are changing. So I want to leave this with you. As you look at your health systems, workflow wins, right? What can workflows do for you, right? And they're going to be influenced by AI. So the first one is automated triage and routing, right? AI-driven workflows that streamline patient intakes, referrals, case management. That's what I see happening a lot from a workflow perspective. Task automation. Now, this is a big thing. You want to reduce the amount of manual processing that you're doing, scheduling, documentation. It frees up the clinician for more time for patient care. And then finally, real-time alerts. If these workflows that you design are intelligent enough, they can be proactive in terms of providing the staff with information that helps them become more productive and more efficient. Okay, so that was a final point there from my side.
Jennifer.
Nothing left for me. One of the question that usually people ask me, okay, it is the moat, so how do I start? What workflows to build? And do I quickly build things? Do I move slowly? So there's no easy answer. You really have to map your workflows, identify the gaps, what is the problem for one, not necessarily be for you. So you want to create differentiator, you want to create a value. You don't want to be doing everything which is really common from that others are using. So you can buy the commoditized one, but the one that is specific to your business have to be mapped for you. So I'm going to add a plug. So we have this blueprint process where we work with you, work deeply, identify the workflows, see where the efficiency can come, create a strategy map that will define what are the things you can do that can help you grow your business, increase the valuation, bring more efficiency into your businesses. Happy to chat afterwards on that. And then lastly, I would say, whatever you do, like you can move fast, you can focus on the governance, whatever, but if you go too fast and missing the governance part, that's a problem. If you just focus on governance, you're gonna too slow. You have to move fast within this business. Like you want to keep iterating fast. I always tell like start slow, pick one use case, get comfortable, your team is comfortable, because the change is difficult. So you want to build slowly, but at the same time, you don't want to take too long. So once you identify what you want to do, then you do it fast.
All right, that's a wrap.